Will you please pray with me? O Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, beloved Jesus Christ, blessed Master, saints and sages of all religions, I bow to all of you. Free my life from all obstacles, and give me physical, mental, and spiritual development. Make my mind thy temple. Make my heart thy altar. Make my love thy home. Be thou the only King, reigning on the throne of my consciousness. Peace, bliss, amen. I'd like to read from Papa Ramdas. To keep the mind calm and serene under trying conditions is not an ordinary job. It is possible only if you behold God in all things and creatures. Swami Vivekananda was never tired of repeating the story about a sadhu during his American lectures. The sadhu's vision was wonderful indeed. It is not difficult to see God in those who love you and are kind to you, but to see God in those who criticize you, who ill-treat you, and who cause injury to you is indeed hard. This sadhu's case was unique. During the Indian Mutiny in 1857, there were violent clashes between Indian and European soldiers. The European soldiers became so high-handed that they started killing whomsoever they saw, whether they were Indian soldiers or civilians. So people used to run away for very life at the approach of these European soldiers. Villages and towns became deserted. One village was completely evacuated when the people there heard that British soldiers were approaching. A sadhu who happened to pass through that village was told by some who were running away from the village that he might also run and escape with them, lest he should be killed by the soldiers. The sadhu refused to act upon their advice. In a short while, a British soldier came near the sadhu, took a spear, and mercilessly plunged it into his heart. The sadhu fell down, and as he was about to die, said, addressing the soldier who inflicted the fatal injury on him, "You are also he," and breathed his last. To see God in one's own murder and when dying at his hands is not an ordinary state of spiritual realization. India is a glorious country where saints and seers have attained the highest spiritual experience. It reminds me also of Mahatma Gandhi, who was shot 3 times by an assassin, point blank into his body. And as he was sinking down to his knees into the ground, he said, "Ram, Ram, Ram, God, God, God," all the way down, as the life seeped out of his body. And Papa is right to say it's no ordinary realization of God that can allow you to do that. Can you imagine being in that condition, being in the condition that Jesus was up on the cross, where nails were being pounded into his hands and his body, and a spear thrust into his side, and saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." What purity of mind, what attainment of consciousness, to be able to look upon those who have ill-treated you. Perhaps they are ill-treating you now, and to look upon them in their state of ignorance and say, Father, forgive them, or to see them as God in human form and say, you are He also. Can you imagine? Think of those people in your life who you perhaps have had difficulties with, who have not treated you nicely. Either they are in your life now or they have been in the past. Think about how you perhaps hold a grudge or some enmity towards them. And to be able to look at them in the face, in the eyes, and to be able to say, you are also He, and to feel it within yourself. You are also God. And I forgive you. I let you go. Forgiveness, in my mind, is letting go. What are we letting go of? We're letting go of an expectation that somebody should have behaved differently. Now, what often binds us to that other person is the idea that I hold a value. Let's say that somebody did not tell us the truth. They lied to us. And we hold as a value that you should be honest, you should be truthful in your life and in your dealings with people. And we equate that, if we are to let go of our anger, if we're let go of our attachment to that person should not have acted that way, that we're saying it's okay what you did. I really don't hold that as a value that people should be honest and truthful. That's the place where we get stuck oftentimes. But if in our mind we can separate out the two and say, I do value honesty, openness, truth-telling. And for myself, I choose to be truthful. I choose to be honest. But to hold the expectation that you should have been, and this is speaking to the person who did us wrong, who lied to us, to continue to hold that expectation that you should have told me the truth, when the fact is you didn't. To continue to hold that expectation only binds me to that action that you did. Only binds me to that lie that you told me. And why would I want to bind myself to that? You see? You see how we connect ourselves and keep ourselves connected with that person by not letting that go. And so we determine within ourselves, I'm going to cancel that expectation that you should have acted differently. I'm going to let that go. This sadhu who had a soldier run up to him and run him through with a spear had every right to look at him and say, why did you do this? I did you no harm. And yet you created this. You acted like this towards me. And now you have taken the life of this body. Had every right to react in a way that would have bound him to that soldier's life. But instead, he looked at him and he said, you are God as well. And to be able to not only say it, but to feel it, to realize it, is a tremendous thing and isn't something that is just accomplished in a moment. That is the sign of lifelong practice. And we too can practice that in our everyday life. When somebody treats us without due respect, when somebody treats us poorly, or even seeks to do us harm. I remember a person that I worked with for several years, and for some reason she conceived this enmity towards me. And she told her friends that she was out to destroy me professionally, that she was out to, and she made up things about me. She circulated lies and twisted anything that she could into getting me into some difficulties that would get rid of me. And so I had a wonderful supervisor at the time who really went to bat for me and really stood up for me. But then I was faced, what do I do with this person? Other coworkers are coming to me. She said, she just obsesses about you. She is talking all weekend long and the days off about how she's going to destroy you. It's quite something to be the target, in the crosshairs of somebody who's so openly and blatantly against you and looking to destroy you. And so I had to go within myself and determine what was going to be my attitude towards her. Now, the two typical attitudes are fight or flight. Either we look to disappear, we don't confront it, or we look to fight. We go after the person. If you're going to give me a punch, I'm going to give you 2 punches and a couple of kicks besides. And that's how I'm going to treat you. As I thought about it, I thought about what this condition of this person must be. What a miserable condition she must have. And I thought the best thing that I can do for her is to send her light. And so that's what I chose to do. I thought about whether it would be good to what might be called confronting her, talking to her. And I decided that the amount of her enmity was so terrific, and that to my knowledge I had done nothing to earn that at all, that it didn't do much good to talk to her. I didn't see much advantage in that there probably wouldn't be much to come of it at all. So my attitude was to be present, not to hide away, not to go away in any way, but to continue to send light to her, to see her, the God within her, the light within her, as awakening. And whether that did much good or not, eventually other people came within her crosshairs, and she, with the changing of the guard at the top echelons of the place where I worked, she was then asked to leave. So it worked out for the better good of the organization in that way. But with each person who chooses to treat us with something less than what we deserve, even as perhaps we have chosen to treat other people something less than they deserve, and that is that the light of God resides in each one of us and is deserving of respect. Now that doesn't mean that we respect the behavior that somebody has. Their behavior may be not worthy of respect. But when we look behind the behavior, we can see the inner soul within that person who is innocent, who is pure, even as we have an inner soul, no matter what we've done in our lives. That part has remained innocent. It has remained pure. And while it may not be very evident in the personality, the person may have a very unlovely personality. That happens sometimes. But we look beyond the personality, and we look underneath the personality, and we look for the light there. In our interactions with people, we look for the goodness that's within them, and try to draw that goodness out. We look for a positive attribute. There's always plenty of negatives in our own mind as we judge things within another person. But if we look for that goodness, that strength, that light, in whatever degree that we find it, and we try to emphasize that, we try to bring that forward. I really like it when you do such and such. Or that was a really good thing when you did something. Just making comments, just bringing out the goodness within another person. When individuals act in such a ways that it disrespects the God within other people and therefore the God within themselves, they harm themselves. And it's because they don't see clearly that the divine resides within themselves and within everybody else. because they feel badly about themselves. They choose to see what is wrong with other people. And lest we be also guilty of that, we should look at our own behavior, our own thoughts, our own words about other people. As God one time humorously told me, he says, you should make all of your words sweet, so when you have to eat those words, they're sweet words. And so we should look for the good in other people. Are we a blessing on earth, or are we a curse? We're a curse when we emphasize the negative within other people or even within ourselves. That's disrespecting God within ourselves. When we are disrespectful to ourselves, when we only think negative things about ourselves. So to find the good within ourselves, to find the good within other people, the light, focus upon that. Make that where your mind goes to. And when you do that, you send out a signal from yourself that light goes out from you. Now, whether another person chooses to receive it consciously or not is up to them. But you have been a blessing to yourself first, because you are the first recipient of your own thoughts, even if those thoughts are about another person. When you think those thoughts about another person, you are the first listener to those thoughts. And you take those in, and you are really commenting on yourself, ultimately. So if you're going to a drumbeat about somebody else's faults and somebody else's negative behaviors, you are the first person to listen to that. And it either elevates your mind or degrades your mind. And when we speak ill of others, it brings us down. Now there's a difference between having someone to talk to vent to about something we're upset about. If I'm upset about what an individual has done or said, I may talk to a confidant about that and say, are you in a place to listen to something that I've got to say? I've just got to get it off my chest. I can't go to this person because they're not ready, or for whatever reason I need to calm down myself before I talk to them. Are you in a place to do that? And if you get that agreement, then to get it off your chest, to say what is bothering you, what you're upset about. And once you've let that go, you have let it go. Your emotional balloon, so to speak, that may have been way out here has shrunk down into here. And you know it, you feel it. And you feel, okay, I can think more calmly about this now. I can approach this more calmly. There's a difference between that and when we're building a case against somebody. And when we're building a case against somebody, we talk about it, and the more we talk about it, the more animated and the more life energy we get about it, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're getting energy out of it. We're getting a charge out of it. We're no longer venting, we're no longer letting it go, but we're increasing it. And there's a vast difference between that. We're not just talking to one person who's confident, we're talking to everybody. Because we want that person to get it. We're wanting that person to get that negative attribute that we're projecting towards them. And if we're doing that, then we're building a negativity within ourselves and about us. And when we see that negativity coming back to us, we don't like it so much. So we need to stop doing that. And the converse is looking for the good. Looking for the good within another individual. Too much of what we do in our interactions with other people is trying to build ourselves up in some small way. But there's two different ways of living in this world. One is from the inside out, and the other is from the outside in. When we live from the outside in, we look for validation from other people to make ourselves feel okay. If you say I'm okay, then I feel all right about myself. If you find some little fault with me, boy, my whole existence gets precarious, gets kind of shaky. When I live from the inside out, I first establish that relationship within myself, that solidity, that place of calm, that greater sense of self. And I feel full and complete in that. And from that I enter into relationships. And I bring something to the relationship. I bring that light. I bring that fullness. I bring that love. And I'm not looking just to get it from the other person to complete me, but rather I enter into relationships to bring that. And when I do that, I enter into relationships from a very, very different place. I'm not needy. I come with a full sense of myself, a full sense of my own love. I'm not out to prove anything. And if you find some fault with me, well, I can take that. It's like having a catcher's mitt in your hand, and somebody tosses you a ball, and you look at that ball, and you say, what of this belongs to me? Now, most times, when people give us some criticism or some feedback, we either just wholesale reject it, or we swallow it whole, the whole thing. But this is just taking it and taking a look at it and say, well, is there anything here that belongs to me? And if there is, then I accept that. Now, some of it belongs to me. What they say is true, has some truth to it, but there's some part that doesn't belong to me. Maybe the amount of intensity that they bring to it. I once had a roommate, and he had some particular kind of idea about any kind of water that's around the sink at all in the bathroom. And so he issued this complaint to me one day, and I said, well, I'm not aware of that, but if that's true, then show it to me sometime. So one day he said, oh, come in here, see? And there is like 5 or 6 little drops of water around the sink. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. I said, okay. I said, it's not an issue for me, but perhaps it is for you. So I could accept what was mine, and I'll work to make sure those are wiped up. But the intensity, the anxiety that he was trying to displace onto me didn't belong to me. So I tossed that back to him. See? So we can take what belongs to us. We can legitimately analyze it and say, all right, this part belongs to me, this other part does not belong to me, and throw it back. And in that way, we can receive things from the world, but we don't have to swallow it whole, and we don't have to reject it out of hand. Either one of those. We can take it, we can learn from it. What can I learn from this? And as I've said before, I think that a major turning in my own life was moving from this shame-based way of living. I should have already known it. I should have already done it. I should have done it better. I should have done it more perfectly. To, what can I learn from this? How can I best incorporate this lesson into my life and change myself in a beneficial way? When we're highly anxious about things that are coming to us, about relationships, about people who may hold opinions about us, we tend not to learn very well. If we're busy pushing it away, or if we're busy swallowing it whole, in neither case do we learn very well. We're not maximized in our learning. But if we can catch those things in our hand, analyze them, learn from them, and take the attitude, my life is about learning, then it shifts our whole attitude. And we don't have to be either arrogant and above everybody else, nor do we need to be down below everybody else. We can just be right there, even, level. Deal with people looking them in the eye, one-to-one. We're both equals here. Now, what can we both learn from this? We're open, we're clear of mind, we have a sense, an attitude that I want to learn here, and that we can take joy in it. Many times when we look at our own lives, we look at what we're lacking, what we yet need to do. And that's all right, that has a value. But if that dominates us too much, then we become negative towards ourselves and we discount the light that is within us. Rather, if we can take joy in the fact that here I am, I'm in this life. I'm here now, and I'm here to work. And I have this conscious realization that's why I'm here. And I can take joy in that, even though I may not be the complete product. I may not be everything that I want to be, but I'm on the road there. And I know the general direction that I'm going. And when we're of that mind, we can take joy even in our so-called imperfections. In our times when we don't feel so strong, in our times when we clearly recognize there's areas for us to grow. And by taking that attitude, we can gain a calm mind. And in that calm mind, we can be the maximum at learning. And isn't that what we're here for? There is a wonderful book by Dr. Raymond Moody. And he talked about people's near-death experiences. He was, I believe, the first one to come out with this research and this talk about near-death experiences. And he said that when people look back on their lives, two things stood out to them. After they had left their body and they'd gone into this more rarefied sphere and were looking back on their bodies and their lives from this more distant place, from a place of light. And there's two things, two themes. How much did you learn and how much did you love? And I think those are probably two of the best measurements we could ever come up with. How much did we learn? How much did we love? And we can assess our lives at any time. Check in and say, am I learning? Am I learning? Am I getting the lessons? Am I paying attention? Am I open? Am I loving? Am I giving to others? Do I have an open heart or a closed heart? Do I have a soft heart or a hard heart? And those are the two great lessons we have in this. If we're paying attention to that, those two things, how much am I learning? How much am I loving? I think that we're probably on track with our lives. We're doing pretty good. And if we stay true to that, that will take us to our highest truth. So I think I'll just stop there and see if there's any questions about your own sadhana or anything that I've spoken about. Or to sit in quietness.
David, I don't quite get, when you say the purity and the light that's in someone, even if their personality is lacking, I kind of equate, like, if a person's working on themselves and trying and, then their personality reflects,
Yeah.
So can you explain that? How can someone be so pure?
Yeah. Can you remember a time in your life when maybe you weren't doing so well? you weren't reflecting much purity in your life. You're kind of maybe in a selfish period or kind of a dark period in your own life, and there wasn't much life that you could see. And then after coming out of that, and then perhaps being lifted up in consciousness and feeling that purity inside. And I would imagine that one of the hallmarks of that would be a sense that you've always been that. You've always had that sense of purity. You've always had that sense of light inside of yourself, even when you yourself couldn't see it at all. But somehow you know that it's always been with you. It's never been far. Not only that, but it's your real self. It's who you've always been, even when you're being a total yahoo in life. And so with all other people, even if they don't know it, I'm not saying that they're aware of it, that they know that they have that sense of purity or that light, but because we've had that experience of being uplifted and have that purity, and we've always been that. That all people are looking for happiness. Now, I think there's a song that says, looking in all the wrong places, and all the wrong faces. And that's how we are many times in our incarnations. And all of us have spent incarnations doing that. Yet, there is that purity of light that has never been tarnished, never been diminished in any way. We've perhaps been completely unconscious of it, but that purity is always there. Now, whether we can sense that in another person or not, we can at least mentally hold that that would be true. That someplace in there they're looking for happiness, and that purity of light is within them. Now, they may be doing terrible things. Nevertheless, they have that purity of light within them, and they're looking for some sort of happiness. That's not an excuse for misbehaving or doing harm to others. But the sadhu who could say, you are he also. He saw God, and the man just killed him. Just killed him. For no reason at all, no good reason. He's caught up in the passion of the moment or the anger, or whatever he was. But the sadhu saw past that action. And you are he also. And when we've purified our mind to that level, it's not just an idea we hold, we actually perceive it. We see that it is God within that individual. And perhaps we're being treated the way that we are because that's some cause and effect that we started into motion long ago that we've long forgotten about. Nevertheless, we're facing the effects of it. If you've ever been in a high-speed boat, going along the water, skimming along the top, it's pretty nice when you're skimming along the top of the water. But if you suddenly cut the power to that motor and you come to a standstill, all of a sudden, all those waves catch up with you, don't they, that you've been creating by this high-speed boat motor. And it can give you a pretty rough ride for a while. You can really be bobbing around in that water. So for us to stop and then actually turn around and start going back in the direction of the light, we face all these waves that we've created in our outward journey. Individuals who are brought into our life are orchestrated to be brought into our life for that specific purpose. And while they may be accruing karma for themselves, they are also fulfilling a purpose for us. Jesus said to Pilate, you would have no power over me were it not given to you from above. That's quite a thing. He's saying God was orchestrating it. And so when we sense that, when we feel that, that whatever we're facing is we're really facing ourselves. And so then we can look behind and we can say, all right, I can see this is God who's organizing the show. And even when they're not very nice things, even when they're not very pretty things that are coming at us, nevertheless, I can see that these are things that I somehow set into motion. And now I'm facing those waves. And if I want to be angry with somebody or upset with somebody that the waves are coming, I can look here first. And the beautiful thing is that when we see that it's God who's behind everything, we get peace. We become calm. We have that comforter operating inside of us. We have an inner direction that says, take a left here, take a right there. Do this now, do that now. And through that inner guidance, it guides us through this maze of karmic situations and takes us right to the light. And so we benefit, we grow spiritually. And that's our primary concern. And as we grow spiritually, we also help to uplift the whole. Another thing Jesus said, if I be lifted up, shall lift all mankind with me. That's true for every person. As they are lifted up in consciousness, they draw everybody with them, whether they realize that or not. Isn't that a wonderful thought? Every spiritual effort, without trying to help the world in any overt kind of way, oh, I'm out to save the world kind of thing. Doesn't need to be that at all. Just simply by uplifting your consciousness, you uplift the consciousness of everybody around you. So that is our greatest gift that we can give to the world, by seeing God. The other thing is that if we see only the negative inside of somebody else, we're sending the power of our thought to support the negative within them. If we speak negative about other people, we're supporting the power of the negative within them through the power of our speech. Those are our doings, not the other person's doings. That's our karma, not their karma. What we choose to do around that. So we impose upon ourselves that tax, that cause and effect. That those things will be coming back to us then. So it's in our best self-interest to practice the golden rule, as well as the collective interest of everybody. So if you can see the innocence within a person, not that their personality is manifesting it right then, it may not be at all, but look behind that and see the innocence that must be there. Connect with that innocence. Draw that out. Appeal to it. And who knows, you may get a totally different response from that other individual. Or it may be the case that I was talking about in my own life, where, to my knowledge, she didn't get any real change about it, but eventually her own actions took her out of the arena that I was in. And to leave it to God that He'll arrange for that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's human nature when you're upset by someone to complain and want to tell other people about it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're saying resist that.
Yes.
And with wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
a person would just be patient and quiet about it. And
See the light in them. Sometimes we're called on the battlefield. We need to stand up for what is right.
yeah,
That's a different situation.
right.
If we have a confidant that we can talk to and say, I want to get this off my chest, I've just been holding this, and it'd be really helpful to talk it out, that's fine. And it stays between the two of you. But you can feel the difference in yourself as to when you're venting and you're letting it go versus building a case and getting energy out of it, getting a charge out of it. The moment you do that, cease and desist. There's another saying that says, as long as when you're talking about someone's faults, you feel pain, it's okay. The moment you get the least bit of pleasure out of it, stop. It's another way of judging it. Otherwise, you're doing something. You're committing an action through your thoughts, through your words, perhaps through actions, other actions. And you're responsible for that. That's not the other person. They're not doing that. That's what we're doing. And that's where the accountability comes to them, is what we do. And it's hard. Like I say, if somebody gives us a punch, we want to punch them twice and give them a few kicks. We do.
Or it feels almost, for me it feels healing to complain. Like I'm cleansing myself, you know. It feels natural. Yeah.
Because we can get a positive charge. It makes us feel better by cutting the other guy's head off, huh? Well, then we can feel a little better about ourselves. But that's not venting. That's building a case.
Right.
And you're getting energy out of it. You're not just letting it go. So we need to recognize.
Negative habit that feels normal. So
We have all kinds of normal habits that are negative. Yeah. Yeah. Just feeling familiar isn't a guarantee that it's a good thing.
Even on the path to realization of necessity, one is moving from ignorance to the light, and so that you can't avoid creating karma. But if you achieve realization, what do you do with all that load that you've gathered up on the way?
Well, there are cases where people have a high degree of realization and yet they still have karma. And so they have events that come into their lives that prove to be a difficulty. It's a very interesting story about Lahiri-Mahasaya. He was walking along with one of his student disciples, and he said to him, "Quick, tear a rag." And the man looked at him like, "What are you talking about?" So they went a little bit further, and suddenly a brick fell and hit Lahiri-Mahasaya on the leg and made it bleed. And the man was tearing part of his cloth to make as a bandage for him. And it just suddenly hit him. That's what he had mentioned minutes ago. He knew something was going to happen and he's going to be injured, requiring that. So he asked a natural question. He says, well, you knew that was going to happen. Why didn't you walk down another street, or why didn't you step to the side to avoid this? And Lahiri-Mahasaya said there are just some karmic actions that need to take place. And better to just let the natural course of events happen. So you can see in the life of many highly realized people that there is still karma. It's rare in this world for anyone to have completely eliminated all of their karma.
Yeah, like Mataji was beaten up when she was at the ashram.
Yeah, and her back was hurt very badly.
And it remained an injury the rest of her life.
Now there are some spiritual masters then that don't have any karma at all. And they come completely for the benefit of others, and they assume karma from others in order to help them and the world at large, to uplift the consciousness. If you want to imagine it this way, if there were some kind of frail person who's about ready to be punched by somebody else, kind of a big, strong guy. And somebody else who was stronger stepped in and took that punch for them. And that satisfied the person who was throwing the punch. That would be like the spiritual master who stands in between and takes either all or part of that punch for them. And they take it into their body, it's in their emotions, it's in their mind. The difference is that for that realized master is that it causes no separation for them in sense of their oneness with God to take that on. And it helps the individual by helping them along. Another analogy would be in Boy Scouts, we used to go on these backpacking trips with these awful packs that we got from the army that were these wooden affairs with some canvas stretched over and drooped about halfway to our knees most of the time. And so once in a while somebody is really flagging along and the scoutmaster would come and take part of the pack or the whole pack and put it on himself and help the one who is struggling along on the path that way. And the spiritual masters like that, they come and they take part of that load because they're able to do it without detriment to themselves. They pay a price, they take on that amount of pain or that difficulty, whatever that is, but they do so willingly and even joyfully because it is in service to that individual. And so it helps them to get to the goal sooner. I've forgotten now what your original question was.
It was about how do you deal with the karma you've collected on the way through the realization.
And even,
And you've answered it.
yeah. There's also grace. Master once said that 30% of your karma you take. 30% is taken by the Guru. 30% is taken by God. And so grace also comes in and supports you. When you turn your mind towards God, these invisible forces come in behind you to support you. Now, it doesn't make everything just perfectly easy and rose-petaled path. Not at all. There's a lot of thorns in those rose petals. However, it does make it possible, it makes it doable. And that we get a great deal of support even if we don't know it or feel it in a particular moment. But that support is there. And when our intention is turned towards that, these invisible forces come in and support us and lift us up and makes everything possible.
Seems to me the disciple is in great indebtedness.
Well,
and that's karmic.
It's not a debt in this sense. A debt is created when somebody gives you or loans you something and expects something in return. That creates the debt. When you are given something and nothing is expected in return, then there is no debt. But one of the qualities of a spiritual master, a spiritually realized person, is that of compassion. And you spontaneously feel compassion for others. You want them to enjoy what you yourself have. So your heart goes out to them. And you spontaneously want them to have what you yourself have. And are willing to help them to do whatever in order to make that occur. So from that standpoint, you take on a debt in the sense that what you experience you want for others. But that's not a debt in an old kind of balance scale kind of a way. So when something is given to you without any expectation of return, then there is no debt. There's only love. And I one time thought about if I were in some higher sphere of existence and gained that, and Mother were to come along and say, I'm going back to Earth. And we're going to have kind of a difficult time of it, but I'd like you to come. Would you come? Would I be there in a second or what? There's just no doubt in my mind. And another example comes to mind that a devotee of Mother's that I introduced to Mother, and he died later of a brain tumor. And he came to me in vision one time and he said, would you come back to another lifetime to bring me back to Mother again? And just, it wasn't even a conscious kind of a thought, just from deep someplace in myself, automatically, yes, of course. So that's, when your heart operates that way, what can you do? It's just all that you want to do is to serve. And whatever way that we can be of service is just fine with us. Because there's so much joy in the service, even when it's difficult or painful. And when we can take joy in our sadhana, I think there's a great deal of joy to be had just knowing that we're exactly where we ought to be. We're doing exactly what we ought to be doing. We're on the battlefield. We're doing our sadhana. We're on our pathway towards God. We may feel imperfect in who we are, what we're doing. We may feel like our lives are a mess. But just the fact that we know this is exactly where I need to be, doing the work that I need to be doing, we can take great joy in that. How many lifetimes have we lived without even knowing that much?
Much of this one.
Much of this one. We don't have to look far, do we? Yeah. I think one of the things about this up and down nature of the path, we're lifted up and then we go down, and we're lifted up and we go down. We can never take for granted the upliftment when we've gone through a number of those cycles. We can never take it for granted. We know far too easily what it's like to go down into the valley. And so that sense of gratitude, that sense of being aware that this is a great gift of grace is just emblazoned in our minds. And that in itself is a gift of grace. Any other thoughts, questions?
Can you speak on holding that vision of the light and doing battle?
Yeah. Our minds are so embedded with the idea of separation. And one of the ways to short-circuit the mind in that way is to see everything coming from God, as Papa talked about, every situation, every person. And that is internally and externally. When you see every situation that comes to you as being orchestrated and organized by God, when you see every internal state, whether it's uplifting and blissful or joyful, or whether it's downward turning and depressive, shadowy, dark, whether it's a feeling of anger or a feeling of jealousy or a feeling of hatred, when you connect that thought that that's God expressing itself through you, through that emotion, through that feeling, through that thought, It's like creating a short circuit that goes around that and connects you directly with God. And it's what before may have looked like an obstacle, looked like a barrier. That's between me and God. Suddenly, that barrier itself is God come to me in that form. Just goes right around it, does an end run, and connects you back with the divine. So the magic of seeing everything as a manifestation of the divine, orchestrated exactly for you, pierces through the veil of separation and puts you in direct connection with God. It's not easy to do from the standpoint that the mind has been so enculturated into thinking of duality, of separation, that it wants and it very easily goes down that pathway. Well, they shouldn't have treated me that way. Or, if I were a devotee, I wouldn't be feeling this way, or wouldn't be having these thoughts. And bang, there's the separation right there. So to say, oh, isn't that interesting? That God comes to me in that form. And you can say, God, that's interesting. You tell me to have a pure mind, but you're making me think like that. What's the deal here? How come you're not giving me pure thoughts? What are you giving me those thoughts for? And just by doing that, creates that connection back to the source again. So you bring everything back to the source, and then there's no obstacles. Everything is a reminder. Everything is a manifestation coming from that singular source. Now you might think, well, I'll give energy to that negative thought. But that's not the way it works when we're really connecting it back to the source. It takes away the power of that thought. Suddenly it doesn't have any power over us anymore. So if we do that with everything that comes to us, every situation, every internal feeling, sensation, thought, then we're always going back to that original source. So that's kind of the lazy man's way to enlightenment. But it's very effective, especially when we're building obstacles in our mind, when we're building up these ideas of separation. And we think we're being a good devotee, because we're beating ourselves on the back what a terrible devotee we are, and we think, oh, that's being a good devotee. We're actually just creating a thicker wall of separation. So we say, oh, God's coming to me in that form, in that way. Just go right around it, right back to the source.
So there's never any judgment in it.
There's no judgment.
It just is.
It just is. And it all comes from a singular source. There are no two sources. There's not two minds. There's not two entities. There's not God out there and me here. It does not exist. It's a unified field. Completely one in consciousness. And that constant affirmation, that constant mind going back to that, will put you in touch with the purity of that source. And will automatically, without you trying to take away anything, will automatically align you with that. Isn't that wonderful? And what could be simpler? But as I say, the mind has been very much trained into thinking of duality. So but even when we go, okay, well, there's this stubborn mind here, that is coming from God too. And we connect that back to the source. This material mind that seems to be drawn to the outer world, that comes from God too. Go back to the source. Every single thing. Everything that would be perceived as an obstacle, as different than, you connect it back to the source.
Just in that understanding takes us a step closer.
Your experience will prove it.
Yeah.
Your experience will prove it. When you implement that and you feel closer to that purity, closer to that light, closer to the source. And does it take away from the idea of separation? Does it seem to cut the power to that idea of separation? And if that's the case, then it's proved itself.
I really do find it so much easier in the blissful than in the ugly.
And of course, we're attracted to that more, and that's natural. But we can build up such a case against the ugly and the dark that we actually give it power. And that's one of the things that God showed me one time, is that when we focus on things, we give it life. Say some thought pattern comes traipsing through your mind. And you haven't been thinking about that for a long time, but suddenly it comes through. If you grab hold of it and you start focusing on it, either as a positive or a negative, you start infusing it with life energy through the power of your thought. If you simply let it go, then it gets no power from you and it fizzles out. It dies. That we create our own dragons, we create our own obstacles. We give it power by our choice of what we choose to focus our mind on. When we withdraw our mind from that, we withdraw the power from it. Now, it may have some momentum where it continues to carry on, but if we consistently cut our attention from it and put it someplace else, it'll fizzle out. So it's quite something. There's a movie one time. It's 1950s. It's quite an interesting movie, The Forbidden Planet. Don't know if you've ever seen it or not. But these people go to this foreign planet, this other planet, and there had been beings who had lived there, but they're long since gone. Fellow puts on this equipment that accelerates his mind a great deal, and by putting it on, his mind takes on great powers. One of the things that happens is it starts killing all the other people on the planet. His own subconscious rage starts acting out as this monster that's killing. I hope I didn't ruin the movie for you. But it's a very interesting parallel to what we do to ourselves. We infuse energy into our own monsters by the power of our own thought and focus of attention. And sometimes the more we hate something about ourselves, the more power we give to it. And it reinforces itself. And then we see it as something other than ourselves or something out of control within us. We think, oh, what did I do to deserve this? Why is God so mean to me? And the reality is we are infusing it with life energy, with power. Even our shadow. Those things that we think would be the last thing we would give power to. And yet we do. Because of our own belief in them, our own power of thought that we concentrate onto them. So take away that thought and it loses its power. It can't exist. Cannot exist. And that is why Mother's simple injunction, keep your mind on God. Keep your mind on the highest, on the light. Let go of these other things. You know, if I tell you to not think of a pink elephant, first thing you have to do, of course, is to think of a pink elephant, to think what you're not supposed to think about. So oftentimes when we try to distract, say, okay, I'm not going to think about that, we end up giving it tremendous power. So we have to work at creating a positive image in our mind. What do I want to put my mind on? And let go of that other. Let go of it. Through practice, we get there. And of course, that's where chanting and meditating, and it's all putting our mind on the positive, all putting it onto God, and taking it away from all these other things. And when our mind is only filled with light and the highest, then that's what we become. The mind gets purified, and that's what we become.
I'm greatly looking forward to it.
And it operates in that manner like mathematics. The more exacting, the more intense we are in our own thoughts about that, the more results we get. And I've often thought that the wonderful gift that Mother and Papa and Master gave to us is their focus on getting their realization. They're so focused on it. And that's the commonality amongst all the great masters, is their absolute 100% focus on getting to the goal and not letting anything get in between.
So, David, can you speak about free will then? If there's no duality, where does free will come in there? Is that also God, right? Working through you?
Mm-hmm.
But it's your free will?
Uh-huh. And you are God. So God has encased himself in a small unit called honor. That says, okay, I'm this person who's making my way through life. That's an assumed ignorance that God has taken on. And within that, what's called the Atman, the soul, you have free will that is inviolable, cannot be taken away from you. And through your own actions and then the reactions that come back to you, you learn about yourself, you learn about life, you learn better about how to attune yourself to the light and to divine consciousness. The pain of being out of harmony with that guides you, and eventually you start to guide yourself with wisdom. And when you guide yourself with that wisdom, you attune yourself more positively to that light, more and more. But always it's your own free will. Mother once said that in her highly realized state, her perfectly realized state that she had, she retained her free will. But it was her will to do God's will. But that was her will every moment of the day. But never once, as a soul, did she ever lose her free will. So free will is inviolable. It's not something that can be taken away from you. And if we choose to go against the laws of spiritual living or natural living, we face the natural consequences of that. When we choose to abide and conform our lives with those inner laws of divine truth, those laws of nature around us, then we benefit from it. And it's just simply this, and it's put to every one of us as a soul. You choose. We choose each moment. Every moment we have a thought, every moment we speak some words, every moment we do an action. We choose. And the law is in operation, and we are the recipients of that law of karma. And so it goes. And as Elizabeth Hike said about those who are slow learners or recalcitrant, eternity is long enough to get it. But who wants to wait in eternity? Not many. Although by the appearances, some people are more willing than other people. I thought those holdouts, those are the really brave people, and those of us who get on the spiritual path and run back to God, we're the ones who are kind of, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to live in that separation anymore. Get me out of here. So every moment we choose. And from that standpoint, you can look at yourself as God, as the Atman, as the individual. And free choice is there. And of course, that's just a reflection of the universal consciousness of which you've been made up. And God too has free choice. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why does God encase himself in ignorance? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why do we start out thinking we're separated?
Mm.
I know I probably asked you that again, but before, but I forgot.
It's the great question. Why?
He wants to watch us all make fools of ourselves.
But see,
Quite amusing.
embedded in that is seeing yourself as something other than God. He wants to watch us.
Yeah.
He is us. In India, they call it Leela. It's the play. It is the fun. One thought that came to me one time, I don't know if you ever saw a television show, is Star Trek, The Next Generation. And they had something, what did they call it? A holodeck. Hmm? So they could go to any period of time, don any clothing at all, and breathe that air and be in that place, right? Well, here we are. We're in the year 2001. We're in this apartment in Vancouver with this group of people. Look at these quaint clothes that we have on. We have entered into this. Well, what would be better than just even entering into a picture like that, but becoming that picture? What would that be like? Now, if you can assume that you're always God, you're always one with that. There is no real separation. And any time you really want to get out of it, you can. You can set that into motion. Then you might say, that might be interesting. I might even volunteer for that. To have that experience. To have that growth, perhaps. Because in our absolute state, we can't experience ourselves as individuality in that same way. So this is our opportunity to experience ourselves in individuality. The difference is that, according to scriptures, we are intended to live in accordance with divine law, not to separate ourselves. But when we chose to, then this law of cause and effect came into being. And so we no longer lived by the spontaneous flow of spiritual consciousness, but we began to guide ourselves by the mind that started looking for angles, started trying to be clever, starting to explore out in different directions. And we have freedom of will to do that. It's in our design to do it if we choose. But we also have to understand that if we choose to do that, we face the consequences of that. And that's why we just can't quit the game at any one point. We can't just say, I'm done. Because this momentum of karma sweeps us along. It continues. And we have to play that out until we are done with it. We face the consequences of everything we've done in this outer life, outgoing life from God. But when we choose to be done with it, we turn ourselves in that direction. We turn inward. And then we start to awaken to who we've always been. Only we've forgotten it.
So God created lots of separate individuals and beings,
Lots of them.
but we're all God.
We're all God.
But because we have free will, we can go and do our own thing, or we need to grow to become one with God again.
Yeah. It's a way of speaking of it, to grow to it, but really we already are that.
Yep, realize it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's to realize it. And the mind has become so polluted, if you want to say it that way, with material thought, that we've become so convinced that we're separate beings. And that's the place of separation. That's the ignorance. It's not having a human body. It's not being on the planet Earth. None of those things, those are inconsequential when it comes to realization. That neither denotes realization nor does it take away from realization. realization is that reestablishment of that connection, and it's eternal. We've never lost it. We couldn't have our life without that connection. But we move around in this world as if we're separate, believing that we're separate. And that's what creates this world of pain, is that separation. And then, of course, when we act separately, we get greedy, we get jealous, we get, the whole laundry list of kind of sins, if you want to call it. Sin is missing the mark. We've missed the mark. We thought we could get permanent happiness in that way, and of course it doesn't happen. So we've missed the mark. And that's all that sin is missing the mark. And I guess being a sinner is being really good at missing the mark. We've gotten really practiced at it. So to bring ourselves back into harmony needs to be our first priority. And fulfilling the duties of our world, because that's fulfilling our karma. But our first priority internally should be getting reestablished back into our union with God. And when we make that our first priority, it's amazing how many forces come in to support us then. But as long as we're kind of wishy-washy, kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, we get, if we have mixed effort, we get mixed results. When we get to be a beeline, that's where I'm going to, then all kinds of things come in to support us then. So it is an individual path from that standpoint. And it is. We're the only ones who guide our ship. We're the only ones who make those moment-to-moment, day-to-day decisions. And so we either benefit or we suffer because of it. And that's what you might say are the facts of life.
And the paradoxes of life too, huh?
Yeah. Because when you surrender yourself, you become free. That's the biggest paradox. The ego is scared to death to surrender. I'll lose my freedom. I'll lose my will. I won't have my life anymore. Of course, then life gets blissful and joyful, and we become free. Who would have known? Fortunately, we have these great masters to tell us. They say, we've been there. We know. Come on over here. But who listens? Really? How many listen? Should we have our closing prayer? O Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, I feel the wonder and the beauty of Thy glorious presence in every part of my body. My heart is bursting with my love for Thee. I kneel in adoration at Thy feet and surrender myself to Thee. I feel the power of Thy perfection surging in every cell of my body. My mind and my intelligence are radiant with Thy healing light. My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss of my communion with Thee. I and my Father are one. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Peace, bliss. Amen.